What's going on, everybody? Knowledge here. Um, when I first heard about this story, it was a couple of days ago, but I didn't really want to talk about it because I wanted more information to come out, and I wanted to find out if the story was even real. But as the days have went by, it's pretty, apparent now that Kanye West has made these statements. And what he basically alluded to in the interview that he had was, I think the interviewer asked him, who does he think is the most overrated rapper of all time? And he said Tupac. Now a lot of people got all pissed off about it and was like, "How dare Kanye West say that? And he's not Tupac and never will be Tupac." And just went at his head. Which I mean, when you say things about Tupac or even over here on the West, you say things about Easy E or Biggie, Jay Z, Nas, those type of cats, people are going to go at your head because those are the people who, paved the way for a lot of cats that you see now. A lot of guys that are trying to, break into the hip hop industry or the music industry or whatever. These guys were the blueprint for what they're doing right now. So, I mean, it's expected when you say certain comments about, people like that. But, when I heard about it, um, I didn't agree with him, but also I realized that it was his opinion. I mean, somebody might say MC Hammer was the best rapper of all time. I think that would be an uneducated, statement, but. You have people out there who will make comments like this. Some people think Soldier Boy is the best rapper of all time. So, I mean, opinions, is pretty much something that everybody has. They're like assholes. Everybody has one. But you know, first of all, just stepping back from the whole situation, Kanye West does things and says things to get everybody talking about him. He's one of the best at doing it. We can go back to when he was on Sway's show, and he tried to bark at Sway, for critiquing him or asking him a question. He tried to, go ham on his show, which I respect Sway for getting in his ass because Kanye West, a lot of times he comes off as a brat. He thinks the world's supposed to operate and function the way he feels like it should operate and function. So, people like Kanye, you do have to, sometimes smack that ass and put him back in place. We can go back to other bold statements he's made or when he was on the radio bitching and moaning because when white folks wouldn't let him into their industry as far as the fashion. So what I mean. Kanye is just somebody who I think likes attention. The brother was raised around a lot of women, so I think a lot of his characteristics as a man now it comes out. That femininity, always wanting attention, always barking and bitching about something for that spotlight or to get what he wants everybody to do, to think, or to say. But I mean, personally, I don't agree with it. Like I said, I think it was, even though it was his opinion, I think it was somewhat of a bullshit opinion. Like I said, I think he did it for attention because Tupac. Some people might not like, what he stood for, the quote unquote thug life or whatever, but, I can remember being in LA and just the movement and, the influence this guy had across the world. And I'm not just talking about from a hip hop perspective. I'm talking about, the words and the passion this guy stood for and who he was as a man, not just a rapper as a man. I mean, it was a point where, especially out here in LA in the 90s, where, if Tupac said something, you have a whole bunch of cats, ready to stand right behind him and fight for his movement. He was somebody out here that I think played the music industry in a very business minded way. He had the gangster records, so the club records, like America's Most Wanted with Snoop, and he played the radio side, and then he had those political joints. He had those social commentary joints. Brenda's Got a Baby, or Dear Mama, or Keep Your Head Up. So I think Tupac embodied that great artistry that we don't see from a lot of artists nowadays, where okay, I got the radio records, I got the joints that's going quote unquote crossover or give me the album sales, but then I also got those records that I'm putting out on the radio and on the mainstream that's talking about political issues. Has social commentary that's making people think. So I think he really embodied what a great artist is. And a lot of people talk about him, and comparing him to Biggie for the simple fact that they both died violently around the same time. But when we talk about those two guys, and this is my opinion. I don't really argue with the flow because Biggie had a mean flow, but I think when we talk about social commentary and just putting that passion, that lyricism, and that art form behind your words, incorporating poetry into your lyrics, which a lot of artists don't do. A lot of artists weren't doing that back in the '90s. Actually, taking the art form and being able to branch it out in a worldwide way, I think Tupac had that. And that's why personally I would say, he's, if not the best, the second best hip hop artist of all time. And I would even put him above Biggie because I think he just had that passion to move people, and he had that influence to really push the generation to the next level. But I mean, hey, it is what it is. Everybody got their opinions about it. But I looked at this from a personal perspective and just from a hip hop perspective. And like I say, a lot of people didn't like Pac. Pac did have a big mouth. He did pop a lot of stuff. He was easily influenced a lot of times. A lot of people get mad because he symbolized the whole gangster life, or the quote unquote gangster life, which a lot of people, a lot of old heads that grew up kind of, in that political stage of hip hop don't understand that a lot of stuff he was talking about, it wasn't, promoting killing another black man or, shooting people down in the neighborhood, killing innocent kids. The thug life thing was like basically standing up for what you believe in, being a gangster against crooked politicians and the government and the police brutality. That's what that whole thug life image was. It wasn't, trying to promote violence. And a lot of people, a lot of white people, a lot of people who, didn't really understand the street culture, understand what his movement was, don't really understand it. They think, if you're not basically speaking, if you're Chuck D or a poor righteous teacher, that you're not political, and that's not always the case. It's just everybody has different avenues and different ways of expressing things. The way I flip it and turn it might not be the same way another cat would do it, but at the end of the day, we all fighting for the same thing. But I mean, that's my opinion on it. Kanye, me personally, I think he need to shut the fuck up this bullshit, because Tupac, I wouldn't say he's the most overrated. Like I said, that's his personal opinion. So I can't argue with it, but I can't argue my point towards it. And I know a lot of people want to know who I think is the most overrated hip hop artist. And to be honest with you, I think it's Lil Wayne. I think Lil Wayne, had a nice hustle a couple of years ago, and he was killing every mixtape, every new hot single that dropped, and I think that took his career to another level. But when we talk about his art form, when we talk about some of his lyrics or his creativity or his song concepts, he's really regurgitating a lot of things, and I think he's highly overrated. But again, that's my opinion. But you guys give me your feedback on what you thought about what Kanye said about Tupac. Who do you feel is the most overrated rapper or MC of all time? Give me your feedback. But I'm out. Peace.